Welcome to Love and Trauma, the real deal. I'm Danielle Sebastian, best-selling author, coach, and yes, I've been through the marriage trenches myself. This show is all about how to actually deal with trauma in relationships and make it work without losing your mind. If you're ready for honest talk, no fluff, and tools that cut through the noise, tune in because let's face it, love can be a bit of a mess, but it's a mess worth figuring out. This is Love and Trauma, the real deal.
Have you ever thought, I wasn't attacking him, so why did he react like that? Then this episode is for you. Because when defensiveness shows up out of nowhere, when a simple comment turns tense, or a small conversation suddenly feels unsafe, it can leave you confused, it can leave you second guessing yourself and wondering what you did wrong. And I want to say this right away. You're not imagining it. For a long time in my own marriage, I thought that we were dealing with communication problems. I thought if I could just choose my words better, if I could time our conversations more carefully, or if I stayed calmer and more patient, that things would finally feel easier. And the women I work with now, they all thought the same thing. We assumed this was just marriage, stress, personality differences. Maybe we were asking for too much. But what we missed, and what I missed, were the subtle signs that something deeper was shaping the relationship. Not in obvious ways, not in dramatic, headline worthy ways, but in quiet ways. Patterns that slowly wear you down, defensiveness over small things, emotional distance you just can't quite name, and the constant feeling of walking on eggshells while trying to keep the peace. Now, in this episode, I am going to share 7 signs my clients and I missed. Signs that helped us realize trauma may have been behind the issues that we were facing in our marriages. And this isn't about blame, and it's not about labels, and it's definitely not about diagnosing your spouse. It's about clarity, because when you can finally name what's happening, you can stop carrying all the weight by yourself and start moving forward with more steadiness, more compassion, and more hope. When most people hear the word trauma, they imagine something obvious, a big event, dysfunction you can point to, chaos that's impossible to miss. But trauma in marriages rarely looks like that. More often, it looks like patterns, repeating moments that don't quite make sense, reactions that feel bigger than the situation in front of you. And this is where so many of us, myself included, get stuck. We assume we're dealing with a marriage problem, a communication issue, a personality clash. So we work harder. We try to explain ourselves better. We give more grace and we take on more responsibility. But what we're actually bumping up against isn't a lack of effort. It's a nervous system that learned a long time ago how to stay safe. Trauma doesn't stay in the past. It lives in the body. And when someone has unresolved trauma, their nervous system is constantly scanning for threat, even in loving relationships. So a neutral comment, it can feel very critical. A question can feel like an attack. A request can feel overwhelming. And it's not because you're doing something wrong, but because their system is reacting to something old, not something present. And here's the part I really want you to hear. Recognizing trauma doesn't mean your spouse is broken. It doesn't mean they're dangerous. And it doesn't mean your marriage is doomed. It simply means that there may be an invisible layer shaping the relationship, one that traditional advice doesn't always account for. It seems like most marriage advice assumes 2 regulated nervous systems. It assumes conflict stays in the present moment. It assumes closeness feels safe. But when trauma is involved, closeness can feel threatening and conflict can feel like survival. And that's why so many well meaning strategies fall flat, and why trying harder often leaves you just more exhausted instead of more connected. So, as we talk through the 7 signs I missed and the signs that most of my clients missed as well, I want you to hold this gently. These signs are not accusations, they're information. And information gives you options. And here's the thing, a traumatic childhood leaves profound marks on a person's emotional health. The coping mechanisms that someone used to survive that childhood, they don't just disappear because life looks stable on the outside. They often show up years later in adult relationships, in marriage. Ways of shutting down, getting defensive, avoiding closeness, needing control, or feeling overwhelmed by emotions that seem to come out of nowhere. But before we get into the early signs to watch for, there's something really important I want you to know. Men often disclose childhood trauma much later in life than women do. In fact, research shows that many men don't disclose childhood sexual abuse until their 50s, and sometimes not until around age 52. I want that to sink in. What that means for you as a partner is this. You could be living in a marriage where trauma is present, but unnamed, unspoken, and maybe not even fully acknowledged by your husband yet. You might sense that something happened, or you might just feel the impact of it without ever having the full story. And that can leave you stuck in patterns you don't understand. You start second guessing your reactions. You feel confused by his responses. You wonder if you're too sensitive, or asking for too much, or imagining problems that aren't really there. Some women tell me, I just feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. Not because they are, but because they're living inside a story with missing pages. And I want to be clear about something else too. Relationship struggles don't have to come from what we think of as big T trauma. It's not always abuse you can name easily. Trauma can come from chaotic or unpredictable homes, emotional neglect, a lack of affection or attunement, growing up without safety, consistency, or support. Those experiences shape how someone learns to connect, trust, and protect themselves. So if you've ever thought, well, nothing that bad seemed to have happened, but the patterns still feel heavy, that matters. And that's why this conversation is so important. Because today, I'm going to walk you through the early signs that trauma may be affecting your marriage and what you can begin doing differently once you're able to see them clearly. It's not going to fix everything overnight. And it's not to force awareness before someone is ready, but to give you clarity and relief and a steadier place to stand. When I look back now, I can see all these signs that trauma was shaping our marriage. But at the time, you guys, I had no idea. None of this screamed trauma to me back then. It just looked like who he was. And the first sign I missed was this. He avoided talking about his childhood. Whenever I would ask about his early years, his family, his memories, what it was like growing up, I'd get really short answers. It was fine, pretty normal, nothing special. Or I just don't remember that much about my childhood. And I believed him. I assumed he just wasn't a sharer, that maybe he was just really private, or that his past really was uneventful. But now I understand something I didn't then. Avoidance wasn't indifference, it was protection. For many people who grew up in unsafe or emotionally confusing environments, looking back isn't neutral, it's activating. So the nervous system learns, don't go there, don't open that door, stay in the present, stay functional, and stay moving. And from the outside, that can look like emotional distance or disinterest or a lack of depth. But on the inside, it's often a way of just staying regulated. I wish I had known this, because if someone can't talk about their childhood, not even in small, neutral ways, that's not a character flaw. And it's not a failure of intimacy on your part. It just may be a sign that their system learned long ago that remembering equals danger. And when you're married to someone like that, you can feel the gap, even if you don't have words for it. You sense that there's a whole part of them you don't have access to, not because they don't trust you, but because they've never learned how to feel safe there at all. At the time, I didn't see this as a sign, so I just adjusted. I stopped asking, I filled in the blanks, and I told myself it didn't matter. But it did, because understanding someone's story helps you understand their reactions in the present. And when that story stays hidden, even from them, confusion takes its place. So that was sign number one. Sign number two is he needed to control the relationship. So the second sign I missed showed up in conflict. He needed to control the relationship. At the time, it felt really personal. It felt like he didn't trust me, like he needed things his way or not at all. So a lot of our arguments, especially early on, were about control, how things were done, when conversations happened, what was acceptable to feel or talk about. And I remember thinking, why does this have to be such a power struggle? And I thought control meant dominance or stubbornness or insecurity. But now I understand something very different. For someone who grew up in chaos or unpredictability, control becomes a way to create safety. If your early world felt dangerous, unstable, or out of control, your nervous system learns one thing very quickly. If I can control the environment, I can survive. So control in adulthood isn't about winning, it's about preventing threat. The problem is in marriage, control doesn't feel like safety to the partner on the receiving end. It feels like pressure. It feels like rigidity, like you're being managed instead of loved. And without understanding what's underneath, it's really easy to internalize it. You start wondering if you're untrustworthy or too spontaneous or doing something wrong. I know I did. I spent so much time trying to prove that I was safe, that I was reasonable, and I'm very dependable, not realizing that no amount of reassurance could override a nervous system that's shaped by fear. At the time, I did not see control as a sign. I saw it as a relationship issue we needed to fix. But now I know when control shows up again and again, especially around emotions, communication, or closeness, it may be less about the relationship and more about a system trying desperately to stay regulated. And that distinction matters because once I stopped seeing control as something done to me and started seeing it as something that was happening inside him, everything began to shift. All right, sign number three. He pushed me away when I tried to get close. And this one hurt the most. Every time I tried to get close, he pulled away. And not all the time, and not in obvious ways. And it started when we were dating, when he seemed to always want to stay at his own place, never wanting to stay over at my place. Then later it changed, but in moments that mattered, when I opened up emotionally, or when I reached for deeper connection, when I needed reassurance or tenderness or vulnerability. That's when he retreated. And sometimes it was subtle, a change in tone, a distraction, a shutdown. But other times it felt almost intentional, like he was creating distance on purpose. And there were moments I honestly felt like he was sabotaging the relationship, pushing me far enough away that I might be the one to leave. That confusion was incredibly painful because, on one hand, I knew he loved me, but on the other, his behavior seemed to say, don't come any closer. And I remember thinking, if you don't want me, just say it. Why make this so hard? But what I didn't understand then is that for someone shaped by trauma, closeness is very threatening. Not because they don't want love, but because love once came with loss, danger, and abandonment. So pushing someone away can become a way to control the ending. If they leave first or provoke the other person to leave, they don't have to face the terror of being abandoned unexpectedly. And from the outside, it can look like self-sabotage. But underneath, it really is fear. And when you're on the receiving end of that, it's incredibly easy to turn inward. You start wondering if you're too much, if you're asking for more than is reasonable, if you should just need less. You shrink, you pull back, you carry your longings quietly. And at the time, I didn't see this as a sign, so I just adapted. But love isn't meant to feel like a test of endurance. And understanding this pattern helped me see something clearly. This wasn't a lack of love. It was a lack of safety with closeness. All right, sign number 4. His reactions felt way too big. This was one of the most confusing signs for me. His reactions felt way too big for what was happening. And this is where that question comes in, the one so many women ask themselves. I wasn't attacking him, so why did he react like that? Simple issues turned into intense arguments. A neutral comment suddenly felt charged. A small misunderstanding spiraled so quickly. And I remember thinking, why does he get so defensive over such small things? Why does everything feel like a threat? At the time, I assumed he was overacting or being dramatic or trying to control the conversation. But what I understand now is this: his nervous system wasn't reacting to me, it was reacting to old wounds. When someone has unresolved trauma, their body can respond to the present moment as if the past is happening again. The intensity you see isn't about the current conversation. It's about a survival response that learned long ago how to stay safe. So a tone of voice can feel like danger. A question can feel like criticism. A request can feel like failure. And once that nervous system is activated, logic doesn't land. Reassurance doesn't help. Explaining yourself often makes things worse. If you've ever found yourself calmly trying to talk something through while being met with outside defensiveness or emotion, you know how disorienting that feels. You start watching yourself closely, your words, your tone, your expressions. You try to stay calm enough for both of you. At the time, I didn't see this defensiveness as a sign. I just tried harder to avoid triggering it. But intensity like this isn't something you can tiptoe around forever. It's information. And once I understood that, I could stop asking, what did I do wrong? And start asking, what really is being activated here? Sign number 5. The withdrawal was like a switch that was flipped. This sign was subtle at first, but deeply unsettling. After conflict or even emotional closeness, he would disappear emotionally. Not physically, he was still there, but it was like a switch was flipped. The connection was gone, the warmth was gone, the engagement was gone. And sometimes it lasted hours and sometimes days. And at the time, I thought this was stonewalling or avoidance or even punishment. So I did what so many women do. I chased clarity. I tried to talk it through. I tried to repair. I tried to fix what I thought I had broken, but nothing reached him. What I didn't know then is that this wasn't a choice. It was a nervous system response. For many people with unresolved trauma, withdrawal isn't about shutting someone out. It's about shutting everything down. It's like dissociation. It's the body's way of saying, this is way too much. I can't stay present right now. And they learn this as a kid. So instead of fight or flight, the system goes still. And when you're on the other side of that, it can feel incredibly lonely. You start wondering if you're invisible, if your feelings don't matter, if the relationship only exists when things are calm. At the time, I didn't see this as a sign. I saw it as something I needed to prevent. So I minimized my feelings. I avoided conflict. I told myself silence was better than disconnection. But emotional disappearance leaves a mark because marriage isn't just about being in the same space. It's about being present with each other. And once I understood that the shutdown wasn't rejection, but overwhelmed, it changed how I saw both him and myself. Sign number 6, mental health struggles and coping mechanisms. This sign showed up in ways I could see and in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. Mental health struggles and coping behaviors are always present. Depression, anxiety, periods of numbness or irritability. Sometimes it looks like overworking. Sometimes like checking out with alcohol, screens, or distractions. Sometimes like emotional flatness, just going through the motions. And one of the biggest pieces I missed, sleep problems, trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, restless nights, early mornings filled with tension instead of rest. At the time, I just chalked it up to stress, work pressure, life responsibilities. But now I know that trauma lives in the nervous system, and the nervous system doesn't clock out at night. In fact, for someone with unresolved trauma, sleep can be unsafe. When the body finally slows down, memories surface, anxiety spikes, hypervigilance kicks in, so the system stays alert even when exhausted. And when someone is chronically underrested, everything gets harder. Emotions are closer to the surface, tolerance is lower, defensiveness is quicker, and shutdowns happen faster. But instead of seeing all this as connected, I saw separate problems, mood issues, sleep issues, coping issues. I didn't yet understand that trauma was the thread that was tying them together. And here's what I want you to hear clearly. These struggles aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of a system that has been carrying too much for too long. At the time, I thought we needed better habits, more discipline, stronger willpower. But trauma doesn't respond to pressure, it responds to safety. And once I began to see these patterns through that lens, I stopped personalizing them. And I stopped believing that love alone could outwork a dysregulated nervous system. All right, we're to the last sign. Sign number 7. The normal relationship tools didn't work. This sign was the one that finally broke me open. The normal relationship tools I was reading didn't really work. And I tried everything: communication books, love languages, conflict resolution strategies, scripts for hard conversations, advice from well meaning friends. And none of it landed. At best, things would improve briefly. At worst, my efforts made things more tense. And I remember thinking, why does this help everyone else but not us? I started to believe the problem was me, that I wasn't doing it right, that I needed to be more patient, more understanding, and more skilled. But what I didn't understand yet was this: most relationship advice assumes 2 regulated nervous systems. It assumes safety is already present. It assumes closeness feels good. But when trauma is involved, love is experienced differently. Connection can feel overwhelming. Feedback can feel like danger. Repair attempts can feel intrusive. So, tools designed for healthy nervous systems can feel threatening to one shaped by trauma. And that doesn't mean the tools are bad, it just means they're incomplete. At the time, I saw this as failure, proof that we were incompatible or broken. But now I see it as information. Trauma had rewired how love and connection were experienced. And once I understood that, I could stop blaming myself and I could stop blaming him. And instead, I could start asking a better question: what does safety look like here? And that question changed everything. When I look back now, none of these signs screamed trauma to me at the time. They look like quirks. They look like personality differences. They look like normal marriage challenges. But that's why I missed them. Trauma was the thread tying all of it together. And once I could see that, everything began to shift. And not overnight, not magically, but I could finally stop asking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get this right? And I could stop turning every single struggle into a personal failure or a character flaw in him. Now, I want to be very clear about something. These signs are not about diagnosing your spouse. Only a trained professional can do that. And this episode is not about labels. It's not about putting a name on someone, and it's not about deciding what's wrong. What these signs can do is help you recognize when the usual relationship advice, the communication scripts, the conflict tips, the just try harder approach may not be enough. They can signal that something deeper may be shaping the relationship and that a different approach may be needed. One that takes the nervous system into account. One that prioritizes safety over strategy. one that doesn't require you to keep shrinking yourself to make things work. Because seeing these signs doesn't mean your marriage is doomed. It doesn't mean your spouse is unsafe or incapable of love. It doesn't mean you're responsible for healing anyone. What it gives you is clarity. Clarity about why trying harder hasn't worked. Clarity about why you feel so tired. Clarity about why love alone hasn't been enough. And clarity gives you options. You can begin responding instead of reacting. You can stop blaming yourself for things that were never yours to carry. And you can start seeking support that actually fits what's happening. If you recognize any of these signs, please hear this clearly. You are not crazy, you are not too sensitive, and you are not alone. Awareness is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a different one where you don't have to do this all by yourself. Now, as we wrap up today, I want to be really clear about one important thing. Everything we talked about today is not about diagnosing your spouse. Only a trained professional can do that. And these signs aren't labels, they're not conclusions, they're information. They're the signs I eventually recognized in my own marriage, and the same signs I now see again in the women I work with. And honestly, there are signs I wish someone had helped me identify a lot earlier. Because what these signs often point to is dysregulation. When one or both nervous systems are overreactive, overwhelmed, or shut down. And when dysregulation is present, the normal relationship advice often don't work because communication assumes regulation. When one or both partners are dysregulated, those responses might seem really small in the moment, a sharp tone, a defensive reaction, a shutdown. But when they collide inside a marriage, they create endless emotional loops. Arguments that circle back, silences that stretch longer each time, and a kind of loneliness you can feel even when you're sitting right next to each other. And recognizing these patterns doesn't mean your marriage is broken. It doesn't mean you failed. It just means maybe a different approach might be needed. One that understands the nervous system, one that prioritizes safety before strategy, and doesn't require you to keep shrinking yourself to make things work. If this episode helped you put words to something you've been living but couldn't quite explain, I want to invite you to stay with me. This is part of a bigger conversation. I encourage you to subscribe to this playlist because next week we're going to talk about something many couples are living with, but few truly understand. What complex PTSD looks like in marriage and what you can actually do about it. Not in a clinical way, not with blame or labels, but in real life patterns and practical next steps that can help break those emotional loops and bring steadiness back into the relationship. If you've been thinking, okay, I am seeing some of these signs, now what? That episode is for you. So subscribe to the playlist and I'll see you next week as we keep walking this together. See you next week.
All right, that's a wrap for today on Love and Trauma, the real deal. Big thanks to my guests for sharing their insights. Couldn't have done it without you. Now, for those of you looking to take this journey further, I've got something special. Head to my website to grab Real Tactics, Real Healing, a survivor's playbook for navigating a relationship with a trauma survivor. It's packed with everything you need to know, do, and say to navigate the emotional minefield, find your balance, and regain your self-worth and happiness.